My name's Simon Buchanan. I'm the steward of the estate, so I look after the 88 acres or so that are here. If we go through that door, we're where the frescoes are. If you go through that door, you're in the older part of the house, and I will show you a bit of that. So if you'd like to, you can go through that door and into where all the frescoes are, and I'll tell you a bit about them. This is a grade 2-star listed building. So that means that you can't make any changes to it without having to jump through hoops with the heritage officer and the local planners and things like that. So it's quite unusual that they'd get permission to make a change like this. So this whole project, this whole hall, was done around the millennium time, so around 2000. It took them about 7 years to do it. And this was all done by, well, all the painting and the architecture was done by members of this organisation. It's quite an arty organisation. It's full of architects and artists and language scholars and all sorts of people. I think the reason why they got permission to do this is because this was of no particular historic value. The main staircase is next door, and this was where the old side staircase used to be. So I remember coming here as a boy, and it was a kind of creaky old staircase, and it was all very dark and enclosed round here. So the architects got hold of it and they said, okay, we're going to make this light, bright, open atrium kind of space. They knocked their way through the ceilings and opened it all up. They wanted to base their architecture on some kind of philosophic principle. So a couple of things they did that I remember is, one is they put a gold spot in the middle of the floor, which is just by your foot, just there. Probably best not all to rush and look at the gold spot now. But anyway, there is a gold spot in the middle of the hall. And if you imagine an invisible line going from that gold spot straight up, it goes right through the centre of the skylight. So it's as if all the new build is hung on this, off this central axis. The other thing they did is they based all the measurements in here on a single module. Their idea was that if everything was a simple multiple of that modular length, there'd be a kind of sense of unity in the place. Finally came up with the ultimate compromise of 24 3/4 inches. So the slabs are exactly that size, and everything in here is a simple multiple of that. So it's 25 long by 5 wide by 16 up to each ceiling. And apparently even the light fittings and things are related to that measurement. So that's about as much as I remember about the architecture. Then the artists came along and they said, okay, we're going to cover the walls with paintings to explain to people what our philosophy is all about. They like to do things properly in this organisation, so they researched to find what was the best way to put marks on walls and came up with the idea of using fresco, because it's a tried and tested method from pre-Renaissance times. The only trouble was, although there were some pretty accomplished artists, none of them actually knew how to paint in fresco, so they had to learn that from scratch. Their primary research method seemed to be going on holiday to Florence, digging out ancient manuscripts which told you how to paint in fresco, and finding the few remaining people that still painted in fresco, which turned out to be Greek icon painters. Best way to explain it to you is I remember coming in here when it was all just brickwork, and onto the brickwork they hung a stainless steel mesh and screwed that into the wall, so it kind of looked like posh chicken wire all over the walls. And then Mr. Jolly came along. Mr. Jolly was the head plasterer and apparently a bit of a laugh. So he threw 2 coats of lime plaster onto the walls until it all looked like lumpy bumpy porridge everywhere. And then the artists had to come along and put on the top coat of plaster. And they could only put on as much plaster as they could paint in a day. Because the reason why fresco is called fresco is because you paint into fresh plaster. So they'd put on the top coat, maybe sort of about that much as they thought they could paint in a day. Get it on, get it all really nice and smooth. And then they got their pigment, so mineral or vegetable pigment, mixed it up with a bit of distilled water, and then as soon as their paintbrush touches the plaster, the paint gets sucked off straight into the wet plaster. So it's more than just a superficial layer. it's actually becoming part of the plasterwork. The catch of this technique, obviously, is that you can't make any mistakes, because as soon as your brush has touched the plaster, it's in there. You can't overpaint, you can't repaint, and you can't change your mind. So they had to be really deft, really quick, and know exactly what they were doing. Not only that, but they had to know what colour the paint was going to be when it dried, because the pH in the plaster reacts with the pigment, and so what you paint on initially as blue could be green by the time the plaster's dried. So they had to do lots of test panels to work out what things were going to be when they dried in a week's time, 2 weeks' time, or even a year's time. So it's quite a testing technique, but the advantage that you do get is this longevity, so that you can't like scratch it off, it's actually in there. And of course all the Florentine frescoes are still surviving to this day. The overall design was the brainchild of the last steward of the estate, who was here before I came along, and his name was Bernard Saunders, and he was here for about 40 years. He decided that the top floor should represent the spiritual world, the middle floor should represent the subtle world, or the inner world of the mind and the heart, and then down here, this represents the physical world. If you're up for the adventure, we could go all the way up to the top of the house and look at the spiritual world first and work our way down. So this area here is supposed to represent the spiritual world, and they've done that in a really simple way, just by making it a light, bright, open kind of space. But there's a kind of oval shape that's running all the way through, right the way through, and then down through the skirting boards. And I think the idea is that that sort of egg shape is supposed to represent potentiality. Like things in creation, generally speaking, that oval tend to be things like eggs that are going to hatch. So we're sort of pre-Big Bang, as it were. And then the other thing that they kicked in are these three colours. So depending on who you talk to in the organisation, they either represent the three qualities of the divine world, which is said to be truth, consciousness, and happiness. I'm not sure which colour is which. Or they represent the three gunar, and I think there's probably more likely. So gunar is another Sanskrit word which just translates as meaning string. So you're ready for a bit of string theory? If you imagine like a rope or a string of three strands kind of twisted together, the idea is that the world is made up of three different types of energy. And you've got a holding energy represented by the blue colour, which is most often found at night time and in things like trees and rocks, sort of heavy things that don't move a lot. And then you've got a sort of busy energy represented by daytime, and also things that run around a lot like squirrels and human beings and chipmunks and things. And then you've got a third kind of energy, which is most often said to be found at dawn and dusk, and in holy people and sages and things. So that's why you'll find that people prefer to meditate at dawn and dusk and do sort of fine work. And you may find in your own day, from your own experience, that there are times of day when it's much easier to do certain things. So you might find that ties in with your own experience. Okay, so if everyone's all right, we're going to stop on the stairs and just have a look at these panels. So Bernard Saunders thought it would be a great plan if he put the laws of Manu on the walls here. So Manu apparently was an ancient lawgiver, and he came up with the 10 laws of Manu. So very similar to Moses and the 10 Commandments, for instance, if you're brought up in a Western tradition, so sort of Eastern equivalent. So they contain things like don't get angry, truthfulness, represented by staying on a straight path and not going off on a wobbly one, discrimination between the real and the unreal. So that contains a story about a snake and a rope, and the idea is that if you walked into a dark room and there was a coiled up rope on the ground, you might think, oh, it's a snake. But with the light of knowledge, i.e. turning on the light switch, you can see clearly it is a rope and not a snake. And then the last one is wisdom. And then one up from there, we get do not steal, which also translates as don't take more than you need. So it's quite zeitgeisty, really. There's usually someone in the corner doing the opposite. And then in the middle, we've got cleanliness of mind, body, and heart. And then control of the senses. And then self-control, putting out the flames of passion. Forgiveness, there I guess are people teasing you. And then right at the top is contentment, represented by an unflickering flame. These were all done by a sculptor called Nathan David. You'll see some of his work out in the gardens. He was very good at doing ballet dancers and things like that. And they're all exactly that module wide that we spoke about. So they're kind of stuck to their brief. So this floor is supposed to represent the subtle world. So that's the inner world of the mind and the heart. So thoughts, feelings, imagination, all that kind of stuff, the whole intellectual realm. And the two things that are depicted down this end of the hall are the two general practices that students on a retreat in this building would practice. So the first one is meditation, and that's represented down there by that figure. The kind of meditation they practice here is mantra meditation. So that's when you're just given a single word and you allow it to repeat in mind, and then that way bring the mind to stillness. Because we all know how difficult it is if someone just says to you, okay, just close your eyes and don't think about anything. That is quite tricky. So this is a tool to get you there. The other thing that they practice is called satsanga. So this group of people here, satsanga just translates as meaning good company, just like you're all in today. So the idea is, if you're going to ask yourself the big questions like, why am I here? What's it all about? What's the meaning of life? What happens after you die? And all that kind of stuff, then it's much easier to do that in the company of like-minded other people than on your own. So they would tend to meet together in smallish groups to discuss those kind of topics and look at whatever scripture they were looking at. You guys can't see this, but you could always nip down and have a look later. There is a weird upside-down pot here on the wall. And the only reason I'm explaining what this is to you is there's lots of pots downstairs as well. So if you get what this pot's about, you'll understand what all the pots downstairs are about as well. So, upside down pot with 5 holes in it. The pot is supposed to represent the human body, and the 5 holes in it are supposed to represent the 5 senses. So you've got smell, hearing, sight, touch, and taste. And the only reason why the pot's upside down is so that there's 5 even-shaped holes in the pot, and the little light in the middle of the pot is supposed to represent inner light or inner consciousness. The main feature of the hall is this ginormous upside down tree. So this is a representation of the Bodhi tree, or the tree of knowledge. And as most keen horticulturalists will see, it's upside down. And its roots are in the spiritual world, and its fruits and flowers are in the physical world. This is supposed to be the tree that Buddha became enlightened under. Okay, so now the artists start to get a bit tricksy because they think you're just going to get a bit bored if you come here quite often and all you get to see is an upside down tree. So they put lots of other things in the tree as well, lots of other stories. The main story that's hidden away in this tree is a story about 2 birds. And the story goes, it's as if within each of us there are 2 birds that both have the same name. And one of them is always getting its beak stuck into everything and getting fully involved in the world. And meanwhile, the other bird is still and unattached and just watches. Now, it's quite tricky to see the second bird. So I'll give you some clues. It's very big. It's a bit abstract. And you have to look up and look for an eye. Yeah, well done. Yeah, can everyone see there's a gold circle in the middle, just where the trunk comes down to meet the leaves, and there in the middle there's a little gold circle. That's supposed to be the eye of the second bird. And then if you get your eye in, as it were, you can see that maybe the top of its head is behind those gold leaves with its beak stuck on the left-hand side. And then the edge of its body is like that gold line there. So if you trace that gold line round, you can see it's like a great big bird. Can everyone see that, or are you just nodding and waving? Okay, there's lots of other things going on as well. So if you look above my head, and then if you look from this end of the hall, you'll see there's a great big pair of hands and a kind of cosmic-y triangle thing. That's supposed to represent the two things that you need for spiritual work, which is said to be love and wisdom. So the love is represented by the two hands, like a potter, I guess, forming a pot on a potter's wheel, and then the wisdom by that sort of cosmic-y triangle thing. Okay, so now we're in the physical world, and the obvious things going on around here is there's 4 stripes going around the walls. So these 4 stripes are supposed to represent 4 different types of animal. This doesn't fit into any modern scientific view whatsoever. So we've got the womb-born creatures on the top stripe, and then we've got the egg-born creatures, then we've got the dirt and moisture-born creatures, and then we've got the earth-born creatures. So it's a way of representing all the creatures in the world. And then there's a sort of spring, summer, autumn and winter theme going on with the 4 trees. And then all the rest of it really is teaching stories from this tradition. So if you want a flavour of the kind of teaching stories they use, the most famous story is probably this story in the end wall. And this is a story about 10 people crossing a river. And the story goes that once upon a time, just yesterday, 10 people got into a boat and started rowing across the river. And halfway across the river, the storm came and the waves crashed against the side of the boat and the boat capsized. And everybody in the boat swam to one side of the river and pulled themselves up onto the riverbank. And then one of the parties said, okay, I'm going to check to see if there's anyone missing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh no, there's somebody missing. And then they all had a go at counting, and they all got to 9, and they all started crying and wailing and looking for the missing person. But luckily for them, a holy man in an orange Pacamac turned up, and when he found out what the problem was, he grabbed a stick and he whacked each one of them on the shoulder and went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And of course, the moral of the story is that you should never forget yourself. Very good. Wise ones. So there's lots of stories. Some are more obvious, some are hidden away, and some are deliberately more difficult to find. We talked about that pot upstairs. There's lots of pots down here. These pots all mean the same thing, so they represent physical beings. And then there's a great big sun up the top, and that same sun is reflected in all these pots. So it's another way of describing Advaita philosophy pictorially. And then you've got more pots over there. The water coming down represents spiritual teaching. You've got some pots that are more receptive to it than others. But even if you feel like an upside down pot most of the time, you will find that a little bit still creeps in around the rim. And then you get the great spiritual teachers represented by a pot sort of spouting spiritual teaching like a fountain. There is a sculpture down the side here, which is related to the whole shebang. So that's a stone carving in Hopton Wood limestone. So Hopton Wood is a place in Derbyshire. So weirdly, although it's stone, it's called Hopton Wood. So it's a place near Matlock in Derbyshire, where the stone comes from. This used to be called English marble because it's a really nice stone to carve. It's used for lots of interior cladding in churches and stuff like that. In fact, I think Eric Gill carved his Stations of the Cross in it in Westminster Abbey. So this depicts the different types of creatures again. So the same as those stripes, you've got 3 womb-born creatures. So you've got a human being and a stag and a sheep. And then you've got 3 egg-born creatures. So you've got a bird of prey here and a salmon, and there's a newt around the back. Then 3 earth-born creatures. So an oak tree and a rose and a blackcurrant or blackberry. And then down the bottom you've got the dirt and moisture-born creatures represented by a tapeworm and a tardigrade and a mosquito around the back. It's a bit of my stone carving. I'm a stone carver by trade, really.